It's been too many years, but Cities of Sigmar are here, and Games Workshop sent us a box. It's tabletop time.
The Cities of Sigmar are finally back, and I've said what has been missing from Age of Sigmar is the heart of it. The mortal factions, the people who live their day-to-day lives in the mortal realms that really give it a sense of reality, something that we can connect to. Stormcast Eternals are cool enough, but the story can't all be the greatest heroes of the realms fighting the greatest enemies, and I'm so glad to see Cities of Sigmar have finally arrived. So before we paint any models, I think we should take a look at this box, see how complete it is, and check out the contents. The first thing I have to note as I look at these Freeguild guard models is honestly the fidelity of the detail. It's something I was really curious about because we haven't really seen just regular people in the mortal realms, and we haven't seen models for them in a long time. They're definitely a lot less heroic scale than they used to be. I really love the idea that these militia are just militia, right? They're not all muscular 22-year-old huge heroic warriors. There's a bunch of people who look like middle-aged and really sad, and I kind of love that in a sculpt. Obviously, also with the mortal realms coming from all different places, it's great to see some different ethnic diversity in there. But the thing that honestly got me super excited when I saw this set was that curmudgeon-y old guy that kind of looks like John Blanche. Looking into the knight kits, I adore that not only do these models have gorgeous helmets that represent knightly heraldry from all over the realms, they also look generally healthier, heartier, and happier, with fuller faces and fuller beards and better kempt hair, really showing in the models that they are a higher class of people with access to more wealth than the poor peasants in the militia. Another thing I noticed when looking on these sprues that you can't tell from Warhammer community photos is how small some of the fun little details are. A gargoylean nautiloid creature, you know, the little legs in the shell that looks like a baby that's gotten a shell stuck on its head. That's a lot smaller than I thought it was, which honestly makes it look better. Oh my god, the beaten leather. The beaten leather and metal texture on this cloak, holy moly. Really, really good for new painters and bulk painters, and Cities of Sigmar is probably going to be an army that people need to paint a lot of models for. I don't think I've ever seen that on a Citadel miniature, so that's really interesting. The Marshal kit is fantastic. There's a bunch of options there to make him look really cool. Tiny disappointment I have here is the Relic Envoy. It's a little sad that we only have one monopose static option for the Squire that attends him as a mandatory part of the kit. So that's the miniatures in the box, and I actually think it's a really nice box for collectors because we have 20 infantry, 5 cavalry, and then these 2 characters. As usual, based on value, these launch boxes traditionally aren't a great way to get big armies. It's a good way to get a head start, but I don't think it's going to be worth buying multiples because the other contents of the box kind of make up a lot of the value. However, for a box, I don't think there is a single miss in this kit, and I think anyone getting Cities of Sigmar is going to be really happy with these models. But what else is in here? So we have a rather weighty Cities of Sigmar battle tome. I only noticed once the reflective plastic was peeled off. The nicest thing about this book, I didn't know this. This is something, tokens. Order tokens, these are nice, they're card, they're not paper. That's pretty cool, they'll be useful to have. But the thing I noticed, I'm a sucker for this as a fan of old books, and I used to love this as a kid. It has the gold sides, like the reflective gold sides. I absolutely love that. Looking through this battle tome, I can say I think this should be the gold standard of Games Workshop publications, just in terms of layout and contents. Something that I think the 40k codexes lack compared to Age of Sigmar is the how to hobby painting guides and tutorials. This has brief but concise and informative instructions on how to paint all the 11 sub-factions in this book, as well as 4 different skin tones, ways to paint different horses, different metals. I think these mini painting guides are a really fantastic way to encourage new people. It's kind of like old White Dwarf articles combined into a book, and really adds some value to these publications. I love that you would go back and explore these even after a new book is published, potentially just for some of these guides, which gives them some more longevity. Also, something that has been missing in 40k publications has been the actual dramatis personae of the individual units. And the Age of Sigmar book does have that. So we still explain all of the units, their roles in the armies, who they are and what they do. And I think that's really cool. As a kid, I certainly loved diving into these, and it would be a shame to see that disappear from Warhammer 40k, for example, because in Age of Sigmar, This is cool. This is what people love to obsess over and read, finding out exactly what your units are for, why they're in the army. It's really cool. Oh, these transfer sheets. These are so nice. They've got metallic. I am going to be going for Settlers Gain because that's from High-ish, and I want these Freeguild to work alongside my Twilight Sentinel Stormcast Eternals. So I'll be going Settlers Gain as my Freeguild faction. All I care about is the lore. They're from High-ish, that's all that matters. I haven't even read their rules. And they have nice gold transfers, so that'll be really fun to play with. This transfer sheet's really nice, and you get a bunch of them? 4 of them. So I guess because it's split across so many free guilds, but this should give you heaps of transfers. And a bunch of these symbols will look really good in like night houses for 40k and stuff. Cards for orders, command traits, all those reference cards coming in the box, which is cool. War Scroll cards in a nice sleeve. I like that they come with this sleeve. One of the problems with previous War Scroll cards I've seen from Dominion, etc., is they don't have anything to put them in, so that once they're out, you end up losing them. But we actually have all the rules reference cards, starter cards in this box, which is super cool. The big ones are double-sided. They've got the faction on the back, model on the front. These are really handy in play. It's nice to get them in the box. Obviously bases, and that's it. So there it is. That's the contents of the Cities of Sigmar box, but I'm not just gonna go through the box. It's time to build and paint some models. I'm not gonna have time to paint the entire army in this video. We actually don't receive these boxes that long before they go out, but I do have time to do more than an unboxing. So I'm going to pick a couple of example models from the factions, test my new paint scheme out, and paint some cool stuff up to show you all. So diving into the actual kit, I got to finally look at all these parts. And as I clipped these off, I decided to assemble a small ragtag motley crew of these steel helms, grabbing a few different torsos and then just picking the parts that sang to me. One thing I did notice at this early stage is perhaps a downside to the way that Games Workshop have been approaching this modular diversity in this kit. So rather than sculpting a few fairly unique body types for the steel helms and then allowing you to mix and match your heads and arms, etc., it seems instead they've gone for a broadly very generic body type that can be used with all the options, and then wildly different looking heads. I think these are two distinct approaches you can take, but for me, I would personally prefer a broader range of body types that you then mix and match between. They're all wearing breastplates, so you don't really need to go too heavily into whether or not they're coded male or female. The main point is having some that are larger, some that are smaller, some that are more slight, some that are taller, just slightly, would have really helped some of the more extreme looking head options fit better on the models. I actually find that despite these being brand new kits, some of the heads do look rather oversized on the torsos, or like the limbs are a little bit small relative to the face you've chosen. Most of them work really well, however, but this is just a weird little peculiar thing I noticed. So a bit of a tangent here, but as a major kit basher, I love mixing together models, and there are very few models with as storied a history of use in conversions as the classic Empire models or the Warhammer Fantasy Battles range. So I immediately thought, well, what would these models look like? Well, thankfully the arms are the most basic joints possible and the head is a ball and socket, so I tried a whole bunch of random bits around the studio, throwing on arms and heads, and I can safely say I have a feeling the Cities of Sigmar range is going to be the core element of a lot of conversions going forward. So if you like making your own custom regiments of Imperial Guard, or randomly using them in inquisitorial henchman groups or necromunda, I reckon this kit is going to go far. Really exciting stuff, and I can't wait to see what people do with them. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be painting the Free City of Settlers Gain, but with a twist. I decided to change the blue color of these models to purple so they would fit better against my Twilight Sentinel. I imagine these do not live in the Settlers Gain Free City, but are sort of one of the outskirts towns associated with that as the capital of their region. They still use the heraldry of the city, but they actually protect one of the border regions and have some subtle differences. Key amongst the different is the Twilight Purple, denoting their closeness to a Shyish realm gate. With all that said, and following the tutorial, I decided to go for a Wraithbone spray. This allowed me to use Luxian Purple contrast paint to pick up on all that gorgeous texture of the shield and the cloth. With the purple in place, I focused on painting the innermost areas of the model first. So I threw down some flesh tones and then a wash on the face and hands. The next step step was to do the pants, which I decided to paint in a khaki color. I then painted all of the metallics in lead belcher, following a guide in the book that was the closest to how I saw the Settlers game painted. It uses a Kaolian green contrast on metallics, and I think it looks pretty cool. And this is where I ran into the first issue with these short guides. In theory, they're really cool, but they try and fit an entire paint scheme into a single sentence. And one thing that wasn't clear with this paint scheme when they said to shade with a Kaolian green was that you should actually be A, watering it down, and B, applying it only carefully into the recesses. So after a quick repaint, I managed to apply it properly the second time around. I then painted gold trim on both the shield and the cloth in Retributor armor, leaving the center of the cloth and the diamond on the shield in Wraithbone. I then moved on to painting all of the remaining browns on the model. This includes the spats or gaiters, the shoes, the soles of the shoes, the wood hafts, and the belts.
It's time for me to have a spat with Games Workshop's designers. That's right, I want to talk about spats and gaiters. Games Workshop relax on spats and gaiters. If you don't know what they are, these are parts of military dress uniforms that were worn in World War I and in some ceremonial uniforms that basically stop water getting into your boots from your pants. They're leather sheaths that wrap around the ankle. Why is this a problem? It's a problem because Games Workshop is putting them on absolutely anything, and the pant and shoe styles of units really give them some character. I would have loved to see some Freeguild style peasant shoes or big cuffed boots on these soldiers, but instead they all have massive spats on. They look exactly the same as the Death Corps of Krieg, the new Cadian Guardsmen. Even the Chaos Space Marine Cultist all have ankle something. And in real life, ankle something is actually very peculiar. It's not usual for things to wear shin or ankle pads. Most modern militaries have long since done away with spats and gaiters, and they really weren't even something that was that common in the medieval days. They rose to prominence in the 1700s and were used in some wars and dress uniforms given conditions such as muddy trenches. So why? Why, Games Workshop, are you putting them on everything? Are you afraid of big stylish boots with cuffs? Give me my big boots with cuffs, because not only does this add a whole bunch of unnecessary texture and a whole different element and leather color that we need to incorporate on our models, on the pants, but it also robs us of the ability to enjoy buckled glorious shoes, swashbuckly boots, little linen peasant cloth, and all kinds of stylish pants like the puffy pants of the Landsknecht. So all in all, I wanted to have a little rant just about this, and I don't know if you've noticed it too, almost every human that Games Workshop have released that isn't a Space Marine in the past 10 years has spats or gaiters. And I'm sick of it. Games Workshop, if you're listening, it's one of the few flaws in an otherwise amazing kit. Please, sculpt some interesting pants. Or shoes.
Following the guides for the metal in the book, I used Gore Grunter fur to shade the metallics, but I did use Reikland flesh shade on the tabard golds just to make them a little bit more distinct from the shield. At this stage, something wasn't looking quite right to me, so I grabbed the Luxion purple, and with a couple of more coats of contrast, I built up a little bit more depth in the purples. And after that was done, I definitely liked them a lot more. So then I grabbed Skeleton Horde contrast, and I painted that all over the remaining Wraithbone areas of the cloth, allowing that to be a nice thin coat tinting all of the fabric. I also did this on the front of the shield, and then used Wraithbone to come back over and clean up all those areas. Once I'd re-highlighted with that established base coat, I stippled on rough highlights on the cloth using Vallejo's flat white, and then a careful line highlight on both the rivets and also the edges of the diamond on the shield. I then came back to the pants, stippling on highlights on all of the browns, struggling to find enough brown tones that were distinct and different enough for all the different overlapping textures that are super similar on the model. With everything dry up to this point, I could now start to highlight my metallics, and I used Stormhost Silver to make the armor a lot more bright, and then used a glaze of Liberator Gold and Stormhost Silver on the shield and the metallic areas around the cloth to make them pop. Once these elements have been lightened up, the model really starts to come together a lot more cohesively, and I'm starting to like where it's going. However, at this point, I was really unhappy with those gaiters, and I was having a spat with those spats, so I actually grabbed Gore Grunter fur and applied the contrast across the entirety of them, making them a much darker leather. Overall, I think this was for the best, as they sit a lot nicer now on the model.
So an interesting thing I've had to deal with is a color scheme that doesn't look quite right. Yes, I've confronted the idea that changing the color to purple wasn't as simple as it appeared. I'd really liked the turquoise tinted armor of Settler's Gain, and I thought I could just swap to purple to better represent my army and everything would be fine. But of course, things don't work like that and something is off with this model. So after a lot of looking, I realized it was because the armor was now contrasting rather than complementary. So what I did is I decided to tint all of the armor purple using Magos purple instead of that Acalian green. Now at this point, I also wanted to mention a little flaw in these really nice paint guides is it's not as simple as they make out. A lot of things are more glazes, tints, minor effects, and don't quite look the same way as they do when you paint them following the guide as presented. So be careful with that one. I just wanted to take this opportunity to break away and talk about that fact that sometimes what you think is simple, changing a single color in a paint scheme that's established, is actually a lot more complicated as that change affects the overall vibe of the miniature, all the other colors that were picked by the heavy metal team and so forth. So it's important to analyze when something feels wrong about your paint scheme, try and find out what it is that's bugging you, and then see if you can't find a way to fix it. Now with this new purple tinted armor, I can safely say it looks a lot better. Getting rid of that contrast and going for complementary has pulled this model together nicely. So the first thing I did is paint it really roughly in a brown and then put some Vallejo earth paste on top of that and allowed it to dry. With that dry, I applied some Mod Podge and a static grass applicator to put on two different mixes, one with a more yellow coloration and another with a softer, more desaturated dry grass mix. These two together make for a really good summer and sun-bleached field appearance, which is very suitable for my vision of the bright realm of Haish. I topped these off with some tufts and some nice orange flowers and a small rock, and then trimmed the base black, and I'm really happy with this test model. My Freeguilder looks glorious, and I'm very happy with her, but one of my issues I've noticed is that all of the models are kind of weirdly proportioned. The fact that they have these diverse heads, they don't really fit the uniform body sizes, and these Freeguild guards, these Cities of Sigmar, kind of look really small, and some of them look great, some of the heads just look a little at odds. And it's time for me to tackle the knights. I'm really excited to make one of these knights, but something I've noticed is the knights are actually like 50% larger scale than the infantry. It's really peculiar. If the knights were standing up off their horses, they would be head and shoulders above these militiamen. I don't know what the go is with this inconsistent scale, but it is another minor point that you all out there might want to know and wouldn't have noticed from the pictures of the models. So be aware, if the knights got off their horses, they would be, compared to the infantry, head and shoulders above them. They are bizarrely huge, and I mean, I don't really care, but you might. These knights are actually ingenious, and so far my favorite part of this entire box. They are built spectacularly, and what I really like about them is that the top of the horses and the bottoms of the horses are completely interchangeable. That gives you a whole lot of poses to match with all different barding on each of these models. Topped with that, we have helmets that can be posed open and closed, and a whole bunch of gubbins to decorate your knights in a bunch of different ways. And for me personally, this is one of the nicest medieval kits they have ever produced. I think these look really fantastic, they go together well, and while they're incredibly detailed for a glorious Knight of the Realm, I think that is only appropriate. I'm really excited to make some interesting knights using the themed parts and also adding some of my own. The helmets all have this ridiculous crest on the top of them, and I can picture that being really easy to snip off with some clippers and replace with any plastic bit you might happen to find. If you want to grab a small frog from a Seraphim kit and make the Frog Knight, that is entirely up to you and easy to do with a simple clip and glue. But I've chosen a fairly generic representative of nobility for my first knight model, picking the large torso, that full-bodied chest with a sash, and going for a helmet open appearance as he or she cants across the battlefield. Now I'm going to get to painting this model using the same spray undercoat of Wraithbone and attacking some of these areas in exactly the same way as I had for my Freeguild guard. Now I've got to admit I got carried away painting this cavalry model and I didn't quite finish it to the standard I'd like to. There's still a few point highlights on the white I'd like to do, and of course some polish on the face, but broadly this is definitely tabletop ready and I'm really happy with how it's gone so far. Of course, with the review box, we only get so much time to paint models for it before we can get the video out for you all, so I hope you've enjoyed the content. Thank you all so much to all of our patrons. Without you, we could not keep up the rapid pace of videos to a week to keep you entertained as you eat your breakfast, have your cups of tea, or struggle through your lunch breaks. If you'd like to consider signing up and supporting our Patreon, it would really mean a lot and help out the channel. But if you prefer something more tangible for your dollars but would still like to support us, Tabletop Time has a merch store and the links are in the description. We have a range of merchandise, including but not limited to t-shirts, aprons, posters for our role-playing game, and also a growing library of house-made 3D printed files, including a very stylish Space Bears bust.
The opportunities presented by this tome are too great to imagine, yet imagine them we have done in this video. If you'd like to see more nonsense like this, make sure to subscribe to Tabletop Time. But until individual plastic kits get released, I think Sigmar Dave could go back in the cupboard. But until then, I'll dream of my god. For Sigmar!